Hello, welcome to the Self Learning Podcast by Dr. Sushma Singh. Let us start discussion on Chapter 5 Indian Sociologist, and our topic is D.P. Mukherjee on tradition and change. It was through his dissatisfaction with Indian history and economics that D.P. turned to sociology. He felt very strongly that the crucial distinctive feature of India was its social system, and that therefore it was important for each social science to be rooted in this context. The decisive aspect of the Indian context was social aspect. History, politics and economics in India were less developed in comparison with the West. However, the social dimensions were overdeveloped. As DP wrote, my conviction grew that India had society and very little else. In fact, she had too much of it. Her history, her economics, and even her philosophy, I realized, had always centered in social groups and at best in socialized persons. Given the centrality of society in India, it became the first duty of an Indian sociologist to study and to know the social traditions of India. For DP, this study of tradition was not oriented only towards the past, but also included sensitivity to change. Thus, tradition was a living tradition, maintaining its links with the past but also adapting to the present and thus evolving over time. As he wrote, it is not enough for the Indian sociologist to be a sociologist. He must be an Indian first. That is, he is to share in the folk ways, mores, customs, and traditions for the purpose of understanding his social system and what lies beneath it and beyond it. In keeping with this view, he believed that the sociologist should learn and be familiar with both high and low languages and cultures, not only Sanskrit, Persian, or Arabic, but also local dialects. DP argued that the Indian culture and society are not individualistic in the Western sense. The average Indian individual's pattern of desires is more or less rigidly fixed by his socio-cultural group pattern, and he hardly deviates from it. Thus, the Indian social system is basically oriented towards group, sect, or caste action, not voluntaristic individual action. Although voluntarism was beginning to influence the urban middle classes, its appearance ought to be itself an interesting subject of study for the Indian sociologist. DP pointed out that the root meaning of the word tradition is to transmit. Its Sanskrit equivalents are either parampara, that is succession, or aditya, which comes from the same root as itihas or history. Traditions are thus strongly rooted in the past that is kept alive through the repeated recalling and retelling of the stories and myths. However, this link with the past does not rule out change, but indicates a process of adaptation to it. Internal and external sources of change are always present in every society. The most commonly cited internal source of change in Western societies is the economy, but this source has not been an effective in India. Class conflict, DP believed, had been smoothened and covered by caste traditions. in the Indian context, where new class relations had not yet emerged very sharply. Based on this understanding, he concluded that one of the first tasks for a dynamic Indian sociology would be to provide an account of internal non-economic causes of change. DP believed that there were three principles of change recognized in Indian traditions, namely Shruti, Smriti, and Anubhava. Of these, the last, Anubhava or personal experience, is the revolutionary principle. However, in the Indian context, personal experience soon flowered into collective experience. This meant that the most important principle of change in Indian society was generalized Anubhava, or the collective experience of groups. The high traditions were centered in Smriti and Shruti, but they were periodically challenged by the collective experience of groups and sects, as for example in the Bhakti movement. DP emphasized that this was true not only to Hindu but also of Muslim culture in India. In Indian Islam, the Sufis have stressed love and experience rather than holy texts, and have been important in bringing about change. Thus, for DP, the Indian context is not one where discursive reason, buddhi, vichar, is the dominant force for change. Anubhava and prem, experience and love, have been historically superior as agents of change. Conflict and rebellion in the Indian context have tended to work through collective experiences, but the resilience of tradition ensures that the pressure of conflict produces change in the tradition without breaking it. So, we have repeatedly cycles of dominant orthodoxy being challenged by popular revolts, which succeeded in transforming orthodoxy, but are eventually reabsorbed into these transformed traditions. This process of change or rebellion, contained within the limits of an overarching tradition, is typically of a caste society, where the formation of classes and class consciousness has been inhabited. DP's views on tradition and change led him to criticize all instances of unthinking borrowing from Western intellectual traditions, including in such contexts as development planning. Tradition was neither to be worshipped nor ignored, just as modernity was needed but not to be blindly adopted. DP was simultaneously a proud but critical inheritor of tradition, as well as an admiring critic of the modernity that he acknowledged as having shaped his own intellectual perspective. A.R. Desai is one of the rare Indian sociologists who was directly involved in politics as a formal member of political parties. Desai was a lifelong Marxist and became involved in Marxist politics during his undergraduate days at Baroda. Though he later resigned his membership of the Communist Party of India, for most of his career he was associated with various kinds of non-mainstream Marxist political groups. Desai's father was a middle-level civil servant in the Baroda state, but was also a well-known novelist, with the sympathy for both socialism and Indian nationalism of Gandhian variety. Having lost his mother early in life, Desai was brought up by his father and lived a migratory life because of frequent transfers of his father to different posts in the Baroda state. After his undergraduate studies in Baroda, Desai eventually joined the Bombay Department of Sociology to study under Gurye. He wrote his doctoral dissertation on the social aspect of Indian nationalism and was awarded the degree in 1946. His thesis was published in 1948 as The Social Background of Indian Nationalism, which is probably his best known work. In this book, Desai offered a Marxist analysis of Indian nationalism, which gave prominence to economic processes and divisions, while taking account to specific conditions of British colonialism. Although it had its critics, this book proved to be very popular and went through numerous reprints. Among the other themes that Desai worked on were peasant movement and rural sociology, modernization, urban issues, political sociology, forms of state and human rights. Because Marxism was not very prominent or influential within Indian sociology, A.R. Desai was perhaps better known outside the discipline than within it. Although he received many honors and was elected president of the Indian Sociological Society, Desai remained a somewhat unusual figure in the Indian sociology. Now let us wind up the session, and thank you very much for engaging yourself with the Self Learning podcast.